What up, Marsh Pod? Coming to you late night Wednesday, January 25th. The move is just about complete, but good pod today. I don't know that anyone would ever on their own pod say that it's not a good pod, but we've been seeing a ton of these cuts and signings and cuts and signings again, and it seems as if it really kind of hit a boiling point in terms of general awareness, or maybe rather the perception of it becoming more and more skewed. Because look, eventually these immediate cuts followed by guys having signed, and I think it was something that we talked about back when the Indy Stripes had cut. The big one was Malachi Booth and MT Bin Hassan, because it was the sense of these guys are signing up, and almost immediately thereafter they're getting cut. And the most drastic one, most recently, of course, was Malcolm Chamberlain. So Malcolm Chamberlain, quick refresher, right, gets signed after Shaq Chamberlain, a.k.a. Jonathan James, is cut by Showtime shortly after he signs with them. Or rather, wasn't cut, but they didn't honor his agreement because he had a contract in place elsewhere. And they signed in his place Malcolm Chamberlain. Now, obviously, Coach Smith, to his defense, says that, Sight's being ghosted by Malcolm when he then cuts him just a couple days after the fact. And I'm not here to discredit what Coach Smith was saying. If the guy ghosted him and you felt you needed to move on, so be it. But I've heard it on multiple good authorities that this is not totally uncommon for the pathway in which some of these coaches, and specifically Chad Smith, have been operating. In that, they have been putting out 10 feelers, I'm just throwing a number out, throwing out 10 feelers to 10 guys, one of them signs, and if that's not their first choice, when their first choice maybe does sign, that other player gets cut. And it's a very NCAA football 14 way of going about it, where you throw a scholarship offer at every single 5-star recruit that you think you can get or that you want to get, and you say, well, I hope we get them all. And when the 3-star recruits sign and start picking up all your scholarship offers, you think, well, that's my team. But then one 5-star comes in and he signs, you say, well, now I'm not going to go to that guy anymore. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be pursuing the best possible players. But how can an organization be taken seriously if they are going after every single pretty girl at the ball, hoping one of them will go home with them? Sure, sometimes the A-lister is going to come with you, but that's not going to happen all the time. And so I think there's a very realistic future in which there's an erosion of trust between what coaches say to players and the perception that players take. I know that there have been some players that have felt that way. For example, Jason Tata, who of course left Showtime Basketball after the signing of Bronny and Bryce James. He's now in Cascadia. There was an attempt made by the organization to have Jason return to Southern California. He didn't want to go back because he didn't have a faith and a trust in the organization that what they were saying to him was not contradictory to what was being said behind closed doors when he wasn't around. That's not a good precedent to begin setting, because now a player will target a team and say, well, is he really believing in me from what he says, or is he telling me what he wants, what he thinks I want to hear? I was listening to a podcast earlier this week in which they were talking about Andy Reid, and Andy Reid was a coach, continues to be a coach, that positively promotes his players and continues to underscore to them all the time the value that they hold to this organization and to his teams. And the individual was talking about when Donovan McNabb, and I can't remember who the backup quarterback was, but Donovan McNabb goes down with an injury, and at the time there's a bunch of rumors that Troy Aikman was going to be coming in and he was going to join the Eagles for this push because they had a really good football team. Andy Reid sat down with his quarterback, his backup, and again, I apologize, I can't remember the name, and specifically told him, don't worry about it, we have full faith in you, we're going to go out there, and we're going to back you up, and you're here for a reason, and you're going to succeed, and the player did. Not every player is going to be having the self-confidence to allow the self-doubt or push the self-doubt away. And if you have a quarterback that is sitting around saying, I'm not better than a Hall of Fame quarterback, Troy Aikman, how is it possible that I can potentially be the right person for this job? The coach comes in and emphasizes that he is. If we now are having coaches in SimWorld Hoops that are going to recruit every single player and are not afraid to cut you the moment a new player enters the building and says they're going to come play with them, how can you believe in yourself and have the actual desire to go out and play? How can anybody on the Showtime basketball team actually believe that what their coach has been saying them is his actual opinion if he is not afraid of cutting guys right away, including just days after they've signed with the team? And this isn't about this being a business. Of course, eventually, there's always going to be a business aspect to it. You hear NBA, NFL players talk about it being a business, and it is. But the conduct that we've seen in which a player is signed and cut within days, not even weeks of joining the team, that's not a business. That's being told you're not good enough, and the growing list of players, or at least not good enough in that coach's eyes, not that you might not actually be good enough, but that he then believes you aren't good enough to be on his team because he has player A and B who just happen to have a very famous dad, that's going to grow animosity. And so if it's not these guys right now that are joining the team, there will be consequences in the long runs of very good players that don't want to go to organizations that operate like that. It's like the Little Giants. It's very Little Giantsy, where they think they've got the best team in the house because it's their guys and they're the biggest, fastest, strongest, or so they perceive to be, and anyone else just isn't good enough. Well, then they go and get their ass kicked by a team that just knows how to play and operates and actually works as a team. I think there's a very real possibility that that's what ends up happening here. We've already seen there's better teams than Showtime. Is there better players than Bronny James? That's going to be few and far between. But there's better teams than Showtime. And if the coach wants to continue to operate as if he's only going to get the best talent, that he's doing a disservice to that roster, he's showing openly that he doesn't trust himself to be able to develop the players that he has in there, and he's showing that he's not to be trusted in what he says to your face and behind closed doors. Have a good weekend.